Welcome back to the GCN Racing News Show. Coming up this week, he's human after all. Or is he? Tadej Pogačar came undone briefly at Strade Bianche on Saturday, but he bounced back. I'll be looking back at that race and some of his mind-boggling stats from the last 12 months. I'll also be covering the women's race, which bodes very well for the season ahead, plus stage 1 of Paris-Nice and the Grand Prix Monseré, which was won by a former GCN presenter. And no, I'm not even joking. This week in the world of racing, we learnt that the tarmac sections of Strade Bianche are more dangerous than the gravel. Pogačar crashed, as did Pauline Ferrand-Prévot, but whilst they remounted to finish first and third respectively in their races, Kasia Niewiadoma wasn't so lucky. Her fall and subsequent wounds look particularly sore. We wish them all a speedy recovery. We also learnt that just finishing Strade Bianche is a monumental achievement in itself. That was Lennart van Eetvelt of Lotto, who finished 9th on the day, a very respectable result in such a tough race. We also learnt that an ex-GCN presenter won a pro race yesterday. Alexys Brunel worked on GCN en Français in 2023, having retired from the sport at quite a young age. He decided to give it another go though, and yesterday he won the GP Monseré in Belgium for his new team, Total Energies. More on that later on in the show. And finally, we learnt that Tadej Pogačar is human after all. At least he was briefly on Saturday at Strade Bianche, where the script was playing out almost as we'd written it in our own heads, but there were a couple of surprises along the way. Firstly, the attack point. The 2 times Pogačar had previously won the race, he'd attacked on Monte Santa Maria, one of the longest gravel sections of the race and one that's hardest due to its elevation gain. Now, with an extra finishing loop added by the race organisers last year, it meant that the section came with 80k to go instead of 50, which just made for a longer solo attack. So I think we were all expecting something very similar or even exactly the same this year, and when live coverage started, there was no reason to think otherwise. UAE were controlling on the front, increasing the tempo until it was at a ferocious pace coming towards the hardest point of the Monte Santa Maria sector. But that is when the race went off script for the first time. Pogačar wasn't the first to attack. Q36.5's Tom Pidcock decided to go first. Now, we can debate as to whether this was the wisest move from Pidcock, but it was definitely interesting, wasn't it? Pogačar followed and then countered, but he couldn't get rid of the Brit. They flew across to and past the remnants of the early breakaway, with just Connor Swift able to chase back on. So then you're thinking, OK, maybe this isn't a done deal. Perhaps the terrain from there to the finish line suits Pidcock more with the shorter, punchier climbs and the technical descents. And then the script got completely ripped up. The producer of the race cuts to a shot of a rider getting out of a thorn bush on the side of the road, and we quickly see the rainbow bands. It's Pogačar. He looks bruised and battered, which is truly a rare sight with him. How much damage has he done? Can he still win? Can he even get back to Tom Pidcock? Well, we soon got the answers. After stopping a second time to change his bike, he romps past Swift and then soon regains contact with Pidcock, who we see waiting for him. Now, there were so many people up in arms that he waited for Pogačar. Why did he do it? Well, he said in his post-race interview that A, he did it out of respect for the world champion, and B, he didn't want to go that far alone. The key line for me there was, it's a long time to be alone. And I must admit, that was my first thought when I saw him waiting. There were still close to 50k's to the finish, and that's a long time to try and be solo. I know he's done it before, but that was when the race was 30k's shorter. Now, I'm not going to criticise Pidcock for not pressing on full gas. He rode an incredible race. You could say that it was wishful thinking to think that he could go toe-to-toe with Pogačar and come out on top, but he tried, and that's what we want to see, right? He's not a guy that lacks confidence, but I think that that race will give him even more. When Pogačar attacked later on, though, Pidcock didn't have the power to keep up, and so despite his crash, the world champion sailed to his 4th win of the year and his 3rd at that particular race, equalling the record of Fabian Cancellara. Now, I promised you a few mind-boggling stats at the start of the show, so here goes. In Pogačar's last 100 race days, he's taken 37 wins. So far in 2025, he's raced 8 days and taken 4 wins. Of the last 11 races he started, he's won 10 of them, or 12 of the last 14 if you go back a little further. Not stats that I ever thought I'd witness in the modern era. Oh, and one more. Pogačar now has 92 wins to his name. By the same age, modern cycling's other most prolific winners, Mark Cavendish and Peter Sagan, had 75 and 83 respectively. Considering Pogačar is not a sprinter, that is crazy. Now, this time last year, Pogačar said publicly that he wanted to be the best cyclist there has ever been. Plenty of us scoffed at that remark, like, hold your horses, kid, you've got a long way still to go yet. But 12 months later, I'm not so doubtful. And there will be people out there who claim he's already the best cyclist ever, given the level of competition in the sport at this point. Now, if you wanted to argue against it, though, you could point out that Merckx had 153 wins by the same age, and that's just the ones listed on Pro Cycling Stats. There were probably others on the road and definitely more others over on the track. Anyway, however you look at it, we are watching history being made week in, week out when he's racing. I know a few of you are finding that boring, but I'm not personally. I'm still finding it fascinating. Just before I move on, I guess the race and specifically the crash do throw up a couple of questions for next month. Firstly, how much has it taken out of him? I mean, even if the wounds are superficial, it still takes energy from the body to recover. And secondly, will this thwart his ambition of riding Paris-Roubaix this year? I mean, it certainly seems like it's made his team think twice. They've learned that he's not invincible. So do they want to put him in the riskiest race of the year? Probably not, is my best guess. Okay, on to the women's race, which was a belter. So after the debacle of Omloop the previous Saturday, the big question was around who'd be willing to control the race. In the end, though, nobody really needed to control in the early part of the race. It was so aggressive from what we saw in the live updates that no early break formed, but tactically, things got a lot more interesting later on. A strong move went up the road and almost all the big teams were represented within it. Pauline Ferrand-Prévot looked to be the strongest of that group, despite suffering a similar crash to Pogačar on one of the asphalt roads. At a point, it looked to be getting out of hand for the favourites behind. 1 minute and 20 seconds was not going to be an easy gap to close. But then we saw the strength of FDJ Suez and in particular of Juliette Labou. What a ride she did on Saturday. She rode like 10 women in the support of her leader Demi Vollering. Contrary to the previous week, they laid it all on the line for their leader. There was a bit of a false start though when Vollering made an attack which was thwarted by a dropped chain, but then coming into Le Tolfe for the last time, Anna van der Breggen anticipated on the descent going into it. It was such a good move from the Dutch woman. She used her descending skills and a bit of draft from the motorbike to give herself an advantage going into the climb itself. And it put the others, including her former protégé Vollering, on the back foot. Vollering did make it across, but it wasn't until they crested the climb that she created a bit of separation between herself and the rest. But then to make things even more interesting, Anna van der Breggen was able to bridge across to her. And it set up the scenario we'd all been hoping for. Van der Breggen, one of the world's all-time greats in the sport, making her return to World Tour racing for the first time since she retired at the end of 2021, up against her former protégé and the rider she's been coaching for the last couple of years at SD Works Pro Time. They were glued together until the climb into Siena where the finish is located. There, van der Breggen made the initial move, but she had nothing left to respond when Vollering countered. So in the end, it was a comfortable victory for Vollering, but it does bode very well for the season to come, doesn't it? Van der Breggen will almost undoubtedly continue to improve as the season goes on and she gets more racing in her legs. And then there will also be the return of Lotte Kopecky, teammate of van der Breggen. And to spice things up even further, you have the likes of Elisa Longo Borghini, who was off colour on Saturday, Kasia Niewiadoma, who was mentioned at the start of the show, crashed quite badly on the day, and plenty of others that should be in the mix as well. Okay, just before I move on, a quick promo for some content on our own channels here at GCN. So the fourth and final episode of the Zwift Academy Finals was released on the main GCN channel on Saturday, and within it, we found out which riders were taking home the contract with Alpecin de Koning and Canyon SRAM's Zonda Crypto. If you haven't already seen it, here's a quick trailer to whet your appetite. Next time on Zwift Academy, the finalists tackled the last challenge to show the coaches they have what it takes to survive the brutal world of pro cycling.
That was terrible.
Come on!
pro contracts are on the line.
I have never experienced something like this before.
I honestly hope that it could have been more decided by this point.
And 2 finalists will go home as pro cyclists.
And the rider that will be turning professional is...
It was genuinely a joy to work with those talented youngsters and the 2 teams that we were with. Make sure you watch the series if you haven't done so already. It is well worth your time, even if I do say so myself. And sticking with Zwift, thanks to those of you who joined us for round 1 of the Zwift Games, which was live on Saturday night. There were some incredible power outputs going on over the various rounds. Esports have definitely gone up a level over the past year or 2. We'll be back this Saturday from 1700 GMT with more action from the Zwift Games, this time focused on climbs rather than sprints, so I'd love it if you joined us then. On to Paris-Nice then, which kicked off yesterday in northern France, but not under the conditions we've become accustomed to. Very pleasant conditions, in fact, and not the sort that are conducive to attacking attritional racing. That didn't stop a few people from trying to thwart the sprinters, though. Julian Alaphilippe was back to his attacking self, and then Santiago Buitrago lit the blue touch paper on the penultimate climb of the day. He was followed by a trio of North Americans, McNulty, Jorgensen and Powless, and whilst it regrouped slightly before the top, Jorgensen did manage to take a few bonus seconds behind Jonathan Narvaez, with Sheffield in 3rd. They pressed on over the top of that climb, but were quickly chased down, after which there was a particularly aggressive portion of the stage. Ultimately, Josh Tarling of Ineos Grenadiers was the one who managed to pull a group clear. With him, he had Trentin and Schellmoser. A brief lull in the peloton behind allowed them to open up a half-decent gap. Schellmoser refused to work, though, which is slightly strange since he had the most to gain from a general classification point of view. But with that, and a concerted chase from the likes of Arkea and Visma, the move was brought back with just over 2 kilometres to go. And so the bunch sprint was almost a formality, at least that's the way it looked, for Tim Merlier and Soudal Quickstep. Bert van Leeuwenberger did a brilliant job of piloting him in the most dangerous moments, and the European champion finished it off in style. That race continues today and through to Sunday, and we'll also have Tirreno Adriatico running over the next 7 days as well, so a lot of cycling to feast your eyes on. And you can watch all of that, plus a full season of bike racing, live on Discovery Plus and Max. Now, I promised to get back to Alexys Brunel's win yesterday. A bit more background to start with. So Brunel was an extremely talented youngster, and the first of his 2 pro wins came in just his 2nd day as a fully fledged pro. That was the first stage of the Étoile de Bessèges back in 2020 when he was riding for Groupama FDJ. After 2 years with that French team, he then moved to UAE, but 6 months through that season, he decided he wanted to stop due to the pressures of the sport in general. The following year, he did some triathlon, but also worked with us on our French channel, but the burning desire eventually came back to him, and he did enough amateur races last year to get a contract with Total Energies, and he'd already paid them back. He formed part of the early breakaway at the Grand Prix Monseré yesterday, and the bunch underestimated his power. He rode the last few Ks solo, crossing the line 8 seconds in front of the peloton, led in by Stian Fredheim of Uno X. So huge congratulations to Alexis. I look forward to seeing what else he can achieve this year and in seasons to come. He's still only 26, so he's got a lot of time left to impress in the sport. Just one more race that I wanted to cover, even though we don't have any footage to show you. Ellen van Dijk won the Vuelta Extremadura last week. She laid the groundwork for that in the opening individual time trial and was more than strong enough on the climbs to retain that advantage. Shout out to Imogen Wolf though, who won the final stage. She's just 18 years old and also finished 5th on GC. She's got a very, very bright future, that's for sure. In other news, there will be no more De Koning in the peloton from next season, which means that Alpecin and Fenix will be looking for a new co-sponsor. Here's hoping they can find that sponsor to fill the void, because both those teams have risen to the top in a very impressive manner and in a very short period of time. Right, that is all for this week. I'll be back again next Monday to look back at Paris-Nice and Tirreno Adriatico. See you then.